Rich, stable, and admired, the country discovered what almost no one dares to admit: too much money can also destroy. The Norwegian oil wealth saved the nation from poverty, but now it quietly corrodes its soul. Because when a country becomes too rich for their own good, danger no longer comes from scarcity, it comes from boredom. In 1969, a drilling operation in the North Sea seemed like nothing more than a routine procedure, another likely failure. But when the geologists saw that golden shimmer under ultraviolet light, time froze. "I thought we had found a gold mine," he said, and he was right. The Norwegian oil wealth had just been born. On Christmas Eve came the announcement: "We have oil, the most modest nation in Scandinavia." Once sustained by fishing and timber, had just changed its destiny. It was the beginning of a geological miracle that would turn the Norway economy, explained, into one of the most stable on earth. But fortune always casts a shadow. The same chance that builds empires also tests their souls. And the question began to echo: what happens when a country gains everything before it's ready to handle its own success? Before oil, Norway was the poorest nation in Scandinavia. Living off fishing, timber, and small-scale farming, its economy was as simple as the rhythm of its coastal villages. Few believed that such a cold, remote land could hold anything beyond silence and snow. Even the geologists doubted it. Foreign companies refused to explore the region, dismissing it as without potential. It was the portrait of a modest people, too humble to imagine that luck would one day choose their soil. And ironically, it was luck that believed in them first. This contrast from scarcity to abundance would shape the Norwegian spirit. A country that never dreamed big, but was pushed to the center of history. And the real question became: what happens when fortune arrives before ambition? Just before the oil discovery, Norway signed a maritime treaty with the United Kingdom and Denmark. At the time, it seemed like a purely bureaucratic move, defining boundaries in the North Sea to avoid future disputes. No one imagined that this simple map would become the most valuable document in the nation's history. When the Ekofisk field was located, destiny played with precision. The giant oil reservoir lay almost exactly at the intersection of the three borders, and, by a geographic miracle, ended up on the Norwegian side. The economic paradox of Norway was taking shape. Wealth born from chance, secured by a pen stroke. Without realizing it, Norway had sealed a century of prosperity. A routine agreement had turned into a national legacy. And perhaps the most curious part is this: how many times does history change, not through power, but through a coincidence no one took seriously? Norway had the oil, but not the means to extract it. It lacked engineers, technology, and experience, everything needed to turn Norwegian oil wealth into reality. In the early years, the country depended entirely on foreign companies, watching its own treasure being tapped by outside hands. But instead of selling everything, Norway made a decision that changed its fate. It created a model where the state would own the resources and the companies would merely operate them. That's how Statoil, now Equinor, was born, the symbol of a nation that decided to turn luck into structure. This state control guaranteed independence and discipline, but it also planted a quiet seed. When government becomes the main engine of prosperity, the risk is that wealth and complacency begin to blend. And the inevitable question arises: what happens when comfort becomes state policy? After Ekofisk came Statfjord, Gullfaks, Oseberg, and troll names that sounded almost mythical. Each new discovery seemed larger than the last, and Norwegian oil wealth grew at a pace the world could barely comprehend. The North Sea turned into a grid of lights and platforms, visible even from space. The numbers were staggering: billions of barrels, trillions of dollars, productivity that redefined prosperity itself. In just a few years, the Norway economy, explained, went from modest to monumental. It was living proof that luck and strategy, when combined, can create empires. But the brighter the light, the longer the shadow, because every explosion of wealth carries a hidden cost: dependency. And in Norway's case, the question began to echo once more. Had success arrived too soon for a nation built on simplicity? While other oil nations sank into corruption and authoritarianism, Norway did the opposite. It built transparency, strengthened institutions, and distributed wealth with equality. It was the economic paradox of Norway, turning a resource that destroyed countries into a symbol of democratic stability. Compared to Saudi Arabia, Russia, or Kuwait, Norway seemed to exist on another planet. Oil didn't buy silence, it bought a future. The mix of ethics and efficiency proved that democracy and petroleum could coexist, a combination as rare as it was improbable. But every exception risks becoming a trap. When a system works too well, it breeds the illusion of infallibility. And that's when the story changes tone. What happens when virtue begins to dull the instinct for evolution? When the Norway Oil Fund was created, its rules seemed simple. Spend only the profits, never the principal. But that simplicity hid genius. In just a few decades, the fund accumulated nearly $2 trillion, about $356,000 per citizen, making it the largest sovereign fund on Earth. While other nations spent everything, Norway saved. This behavior became almost a national faith, the belief that financial discipline was the real black gold. The future of oil nations seemed secure, and the world saw the country as a model of prudence. But when virtue turns into dogma, the original purpose fades. The Norway Oil Fund stopped being just a tool and became a kind of economic religion. And a troubling question began to rise. How long can faith in stability hide the first signs of stagnation? With oil guaranteeing prosperity, Norway built what many would call a social paradise. Free education, universal healthcare, safety, and one of the world's highest average incomes. But behind the glow of the Norwegian oil wealth, a new challenge emerged: comfort that numbs the spirit. The generation that grew up without struggle began showing signs of complacency. Fewer startups, less risk, less innovation. Wealth and complacency stopped being theory and became culture, even reflected in OECD data on productivity and working hours. When everything works, it's easy to forget the value of effort. Stability turned into routine, and routine became anesthesia. And perhaps the hardest question of all is this: how do you reignite the instinct to grow in a country that already has everything? In international reports, Norway often appears as a model of high productivity. But there's a detail that changes everything. Much of that performance comes from cheap energy, oil, and hydropower. Remove those factors and the Norway economy explained reveals a far less glamorous truth. Without the energy boost, real productivity drops to average levels, comparable to countries like the United Kingdom or Finland. The myth of Norwegian efficiency stands, in part, on artificial foundations, a resource curse explained, disguised as economic success. And that contradiction creates quiet discomfort. A nation seen as a global model, yet dependent on a fuel that won't last forever. The inevitable doubt emerges: what happens when the engine of prosperity begins to run dry? Norway's 10 largest companies are, on average, 170 years old. They're sturdy, respected, and trapped in the past. The country that revolutionized Norwegian oil wealth stopped building new engines of growth, and innovation began to fade from the map. Since 2007, the number of startups has plunged. Industries have grown complacent. Young people prefer security over risk, and the richest nation on Earth now acts like a satisfied heir. The economic paradox of Norway repeats itself. The more money there is, the less movement remains. It's the paradox of abundance, wealth that preserves but also paralyzes. And that's the ultimate irony of an economy admired by all. How can a nation with the largest sovereign fund in the world invest so little in its own future? Education in Norway is free, modern, and accessible, an international model in reports and rankings. Yet the results are surprising: below average performance, rising apathy, and a generation that studies without purpose. The country learned how to teach, but forgot how to inspire. Abundance created a generation without urgency. When everything is guaranteed, learning loses its sense of conquest. Wealth and complacency seeped into classrooms, turning schools into temples of intellectual comfort. Students know much, but desire little. And that's the bitter lesson of a prosperous society. Too much safety kills curiosity. When failure stops being a threat, learning stops being an adventure. So how do you reignite the spark in those who never had to fight for light? Surrounded by stability, Norwegians began seeking new forms of financial excitement and found it in real estate. The country's tax system, which exempts profits from selling one's primary home, turned every citizen into a small-scale property investor. The result was predictable: skyrocketing prices, shrinking construction rates, and families drowning in debt like never before. Today, household debt exceeds 200% of income, a number that alarms even the most optimistic analysts. The Norway Economy Explained reveals that the addiction simply changed form. The country that once dreamed of oil now dreams of mortgages. The future of oil nations seems to have turned into a race for square meters. And the question lingers: is Norway building new wealth or just mortgaging the old one? Recently, Norway discovered something that could once again redefine its destiny: massive phosphate reserves, valued at an astonishing $12 trillion. It's a new Norwegian oil wealth hidden beneath the frozen northern mountains. The entire world turned its eyes to this find. But there's one detail that changes everything. Only a fraction is actually viable for extraction. The resource curse explained returns in new disguise. Too much luck can become a curse. And now, a wiser, more cautious Norway hesitates to repeat the dependency cycle it knows so well. Politicians, environmentalists, and economists are divided. Some see a new chance for prosperity, others an invitation to relapse. And the public watches in silence, wondering, will Norway resist the temptation to become even richer? Norway's younger generation grew up with everything guaranteed and now carries an unexpected burden: ecological guilt. Many young Norwegians reject new mining projects, viewing economic growth as a threat to the planet. It's the moral weight of being the country that succeeded too much. The Socialist Party blocks exploration proposals, turning the debate into a battlefield between prosperity and principles. For some, extracting resources is betraying the green legacy. For others, refusing to do so is wasting the future. The Economic Paradox of Norway now takes on an ethical and existential tone. It's a profound dilemma to choose between progress and conscience. And while the rest of the world chases profit, Norway hesitates, trapped between pride and remorse. Can a nation truly keep its soul clean in a world powered by wealth? Many countries try to copy the Norwegian model, believing that having oil and good governance is all it takes to replicate its success. But Norway's secret was never just oil. It was timing, democracy, and a rare social harmony. The Norway Economy Explained shows a case almost impossible to repeat. Even so, the world insists on seeing the country as a formula. Nations across Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East study the Norway Oil Fund as if it were a manual for salvation. Yet they ignore the crucial detail: luck and timing can't be copied. And that's the mirror Norway holds up to the world, a reflection on the danger of global complacency. Because when everyone believes wealth is the end of the journey, no one notices what it quietly takes away. Is success truly the summit, or merely the start of decline? Nothing in Norway seems to be collapsing, and that may be the real problem. Companies are aging, families are drowning in debt, youth is losing drive, and the economy no longer reinvents itself. The future of oil nations shows that modern decay doesn't begin with crisis, but with too much comfort. The signs are there, hidden in data and daily habits. Less innovation, more dependence on the state, a rhythm that slows without anyone realizing it. It's a silent decline, masked by positive statistics and automatic optimism. Wealth and complacency have become a way of life. And at the core lies a simple and frightening question. What happens when a country wins too early? Because success, when it arrives fast, tends to collect its payments slowly. And that's the price Norway is now, little by little, beginning to pay. Norway has achieved what the rest of the world longs for: stability, safety, abundance. But there's a cost that never shows up in reports: existential emptiness. Beneath its social perfection grows a quiet sense of apathy and loss of purpose, especially among the young. It's the hidden face of the economic paradox of Norway. Studies reveal rising antidepressant use and growing social isolation. The national boredom syndrome has taken hold of a generation that never had to fight. When nothing is missing, meaning itself begins to vanish. The true definition of being too rich for their own good. It's the final irony of prosperity. The body is healthy, but the soul is tired. An entire country learns that money can buy comfort, but not direction. And one question lingers in the silence. What is a perfect life worth if no one feels like living it? The Norway Oil Fund was created to protect the future, but it has become the psychological pillar of the entire nation. Politicians, companies, and citizens trust it as if it were eternal. But what if the global market shifts? What if this castle of numbers starts to crumble? This dependence is a new kind of vulnerability, silent, sophisticated, disguised as safety. The resource curse explained reappears. The more a country relies on fortune, the less it produces without it. It's the paradox of a nation so afraid to lose that it has already stopped taking risks. The fund is solid, but the mindset surrounding it is fragile. An entire generation believes it's unshakable, yet history proves that nothing is. And the question begins to echo: what happens when a castle made of wind believes it's built of stone? Norway once had heroes, explorers, inventors, visionary leaders. Today, their names exist only in history books. The country that once dared to drill the impossible now prefers to manage what it already has. The future of oil nations looks less like progress and more like maintenance. In recent decades, few bold figures have emerged. No new industrialists, scientists, or entrepreneurs to embody national ambition. Wealth and complacency have reshaped the Norwegian spirit, from conqueror to caretaker, from creator to curator. And that's when the alarm truly sounds. Because when a nation grows old mentally before it ages physically, decline stops being a risk and becomes destiny. And perhaps the final question is this: what remains for a people who have achieved everything except purpose? Norway proved that wealth can buy everything except meaning. A nation that conquered the impossible now faces the emptiness of having nothing left to fight for. And maybe that's the new warning to the world. When stability becomes a country's greatest pride, it might also mark the beginning of its decline. If this story made you think, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, you'll keep discovering the truths that success tries to hide.